All right, welcome everyone. I think we're now live, and let's test the sound real quick. Does everyone hear me? Looks like people hear me okay. All right, thank you. Okay, so we'll be starting another event. It's Crossroads, organized by Cross Labs here in Kyoto and Tokyo, Japan. And thank you very much for those who are joining us again. And if you are joining for the first time, we're also very excited to have you. This is an event where we share different parts of intelligent sciences, from AI to different disciplines about the mind, also how to solve engineering problems, how technologies can come from understanding better how the brain and intelligent mechanisms really work mathematically. This Cross Labs, so that's us organizing this, is a leading center in this kind of domain of the sciences, and we are really excited in bringing different topics that are somehow less regarded as central as deep learning, for example, and more original areas of that in artificial life, perhaps open-ended evolution technologies, and so on. So I want to thank everyone who is collaborating in organizing this. Thanks to Christoph, Antoine, Onelis, Stephen, many others who are helping organizing this. And today we have a very special event about morphological computation and control. And I want to welcome Professor Rudolf Füchslin. So let me quickly check my notes here so I don't say anything wrong about our guest. So Rudi has studied theoretical physics at ETH in Zurich, and he went at the University of Zurich. He took a PhD in what I think is computer-assisted physics. Then he moved to different areas of physics with some contributions in biomolecular information processing, very interesting, exciting stuff. I think he touched a bit everywhere in artificial life kind of domains. Very exciting. He spent some time also at the ECLT in Venice at some point, and then he came back and got a position. He's now a professor. I think you spent also Rudi some time with Rolf Pfeiffer's lab, right? Also in Zurich. And I think you are now established as a professor in applied complex system science, and you're heading the group for applied complex system science at the Institute for Applied Mathematics and Physics at the School of Engineering, Zurich University of Applied Sciences. And you are also a co-director of a very exciting place, the European Center for Living Technology, that's in Venice, which is not only a very exciting place scientifically, but also a beautiful place to spend some time. So anyone who wants to spend some time, perhaps contact Rudolf and visit his center there. So welcome. Whenever you'd like to share with us interesting, exciting stuff about morphological computation, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Olaf. That's very kind. Thank you very much for this kind introduction. I'm very honored to speak at Crossroads, and I would like to thank Olaf, but also my former student and now friend and colleague, Christopher Sen. Well, I think he was the one who got me this chance, and I would like to start to speak about morphological computation and control in robotics, chemistry, and medicine. You have heard I'm a professor at the University of Applied Sciences, so the applications are very dear to me, but also very dear is the ECLT. If you're in Venice, go there, please. Okay, what is my main claim? Well, actually, you know from computer science that there is the distinction between hard and software, and this has proven to be very worthy and also very fruitful to distinguish clearly between the device that computes and the software, the thing that is computed. However, there's a price to pay. You know, if you take out the physics from all your computing method, you have to put it back as soon as you want to control some physical system. And well, you can do that, of course, by implementing lots of mathematics, but maybe it's a good idea just not to take out all the physics, but in fact to use physical systems to exert control over other systems. And I will show you how this is done. First, of course, you can use mechanical dynamics, as it's done in robotics, in embodied intelligence, but I will show you that you can extend these ideas also towards chemistry and other areas where you use spatial structuring, patterning, and also all sorts of physical dynamics in order to control a system. Well, let's first start with engineering. What is done in conventional engineering? Well, in conventional engineering, you usually start with, let's say, a concept as it's presented here. You have a robot. In an ideal world, you have a robot. This robot gets sensory input. I have to change my pointer. So now you see a laser pointer. You have a robot. This robot is equipped with sensors. You get sensory input. Then you use a universal computer in order to do something with this input. And finally, you produce commands to an actuator, and the robot will do something. Well, that's the ideal world. In reality, of course, you always have to deal with some sort of physical dynamics, with noise. And good engineering is all about reducing this noise. In embodied intelligence and morphological control, what you actually are doing is you make the enemy your friend. That means you try to exploit this noise, which is now called physical dynamics. And I will come back to that in a minute. That also implies that you can reduce the computational effort you have to perform. As a matter of fact, in quite many cases, you can only do it with a feed-forward neural network. So important is physical dynamics, not anymore the enemy, but now a friend, or at least a resource that should be and can be exploited. Now you think, well, how can a system support the control of a process? Olaf already mentioned that I had the chance and opportunity to spend a couple of years with Rolf Pfeiffer at his lab in Zurich. And he always started with gait patterns of horses. You know that horses have different gait patterns. I'm not a horse rider, but there is gallop and walk and whatever. So now the question arises, how is that gait controlled? Is it the brain of the horse who does all the controlling, or is there something else? And you may be familiar with the idea that, well, actually, yes, there is. Of course, the horse is a dynamical system, a physical dynamical system, and as all physical dynamical system, it has a fixed point, it has probably strange attractors, but it also something very simple, such as limit cycles. And as soon as you pump energy into the horse, then this horse will perform movements, and depending on the basin of attraction you are in, this will be one or the other form of limit cycle, one in case of a horse, one or the other form of gait pattern. And the interesting point here is that this implies that the brain is not anymore, or the nervous system, to use a broader term, is not anymore controlling all the details of the movement, but it only chooses the basin of attraction. Once you are in the right basin of attraction, the details of the movement are controlled by the dynamics of the body of the horse. Of course, this is not the full picture. In order to work, transit time should be short and fluctuations have to be damped readily, and the attractor landscape, of course, can change over time. By the way, as Thomas Schack from the University of Bielefeld found out, actually that is what you're doing if you train for sports. See, man, I'm not a sportsman, but I like to do downhill skiing. Well, actually, what I do when I train for downhill skiing is not to learn how to react all to these little bumps in the slope. There are quite many of them, but I learn how to bring my body in such a posture that if I encounter a little bump in the slope, that I have an easy time, that it's easy to react to that, and that basically my body dynamics takes over most of the necessary reactions. So, regarded from a little bit more abstract perspective, in an ideal computer is a completely abstract device. No physics at all, maximal programmability, maximal portability also, and of course there is dedicated hardware, for example, for graphics processing, which is a little bit more physical in that sense, a little bit less programmable. That's this side here. Then, of course, you have tools. Tools are completely embodied. They only have one purpose. There are, well, Swiss Army knife. You know, I'm from Switzerland, so I have to speak about this. A Swiss Army knife. If you're really optimistic and a nice guy, you can say that, well, it has a little bit of programmability, and morphological computing and control is about the middle ground here in between. We don't want to have a universal programmability, but we want to have at least some programmability in order to control our systems. So what has this to do with medicine? Well, you are all young, but I am old, and I can tell you that getting older is nothing for cowards. Which means that when you get older, you know, it's not anymore as it used to be. Your movements are not anymore as swift and as soft as they used to be. And sometimes you have a little bit more problems to control what you're doing. Why is that? Well, a conventional explanation is that you get dumber, but that your brain is not anymore working as good as it should. But as all elderly people can tell you, what actually happens when you get older is that you get smarter. I get more intelligent every day, as my wife can assure you, and she also always believes. She also believes this. No, of course, I'm just kidding. But as a matter of fact, it's not only about getting dumber. One other explanation for the reason why it becomes more difficult to control your body is that, well, actually the body changes its physical properties. You know, the attractor landscape of a 20-year-old is much more supportive for the control of movements. And when you get older, it's not that you're getting dumber, but the control problem becomes more complicated. This is to some extent good news, because at least not yet, we can't rejuvenate your body, but we may be able to rejuvenate your attractor landscape by the application of external mechanical means. Here you see something which unfortunately we didn't really build because we didn't get funding, people didn't believe us. But the idea is, what can we do against wobbly knees? Well, maybe we just can support wobbly knees, and you have to do that in a way that they are not stiffened, but in a way that the attractor landscape of the dynamical system of the knee becomes supportive for the movements you want to perform again. So I spoke about computation. Well, up to now I only presented, so to speak, more or less clever engineering. Is it really computation? Well, as a matter of fact, as Helmut Hauser has shown, well, you know, a sufficiently complicated mechanical system together with a feed-forward neural network is able to emulate or compute large classes of filters, which are functions onto functions. This is not universal computation, but at least when it comes to control purposes, it's as close as you have to get to universal computation in order to exert, as I said, control. So even a simple mass spring system can do that. So why are we interested in that? Well, you know, conventional robotics and conventional engineering is about reducing the number of degrees of freedom. And of course, what you have to do then is you have to build your system in a way that it is hard and stiff. But hard and stiff systems are also dangerous systems. I wouldn't like to my mother to be under the care of a 300 pounds machine with heavy motors and which is very stiff and very stable. That is not what I want. But for example, in nursing robotics, supportive robotics in healthcare, what you want to have are soft robots. And in order to deal with soft robots, or in order to control soft robots, you have to be able to deal with systems with many degrees of freedoms, not few degrees of freedom. And many degrees of freedom means that you can't do it, at least not up to now, with conventional control. And we think that morphological control is probably the way to go. And as I said, soft robots are interesting because they are first safe robots, but they may also be cheaper. And at least some people think they're also nicer. Now, what has this to do with chemistry? Here you see an abstract, a caricature of a cell. Well, you can imagine a cell as being basically a network of reaction nodes in a reaction network. And one has to realize that such a reaction network is also controlled by its internal dynamics. And this implies that it can go wrong in two different ways. Of course, it can be the case that one of these nodes gets broken. So, for example, if your your P53 gene is mutated, you can get into real troubles. But there's another way of malfunctioning of a cell, and this other way is a more systemic way in the sense that each and every node of the cell is well functioning, but the cell is in the wrong basin of attraction. That means it performs the wrong dynamics, despite the fact that all its individual parts are functioning as they should. Now, this systemic perspective is also investigated at our lab. Here you see Matthias Weiland, a former student, now very dear collaborator, and Stefan Scheidecker, also professor at the ZHW. They are using a systemic view on cells in order to optimize synergistic therapies in oncology. That means actually you heat up cells before you irradiate them, and we just got quite a bit of money from the European Union to go further down this road and to study cells from a systemic perspective in order to enhance the effectivity of cancer treatment. Even on a, let's say, lower level, you see here a process such as receptor-mediated endocytosis. Receptor-mediated endocytosis can be described by such a complicated reaction network, but of course, just the chemistry herein doesn't explain what actually is going on. Receptor-mediated endocytosis, by the way, that's a process in which you have budding from a membrane, a vesicle buds from a membrane, and this then fuses with another membrane. That's a way to transport matter from one cellular compartment to another. For example, in liver cells, this process plays quite an important role. And you can't, as I already said, you can't understand it on pure chemical grounds. What you actually have to take into account is the full dynamics of the membrane, of the formation of supramolecular compounds on this membrane. And if you do so, you can understand the process, but you also get additional possibilities to intervene into this process, because you can, or for example, you can modulate the viscosity of vesicles and stuff like this. So we can exert control. Now, let's go to chemistry. Well, assume that you have a chemical reaction compartment, and in this chemical reaction compartment, you want to realize a series of reactions as it's presented here. Well, if you have only one compartment, you have to find one fits for all conditions. One fits for all conditions, well, that's okay, but of course, they will be suboptimal for the individual reaction steps. What you can do now is you can split up your reaction compartments in many reaction compartments, and you can choose reaction conditions which are optimal for each and every reaction step. Sounds good, but of course you have to pay a price for it. Compartmentalization, that gives you the optimization, the possibility for optimization, branch-specific, towards branch-specific reaction conditions. But of course, there's a con. You have to organize and orchestrate, and by the way, also enable the transport of matter and the information between the individual compartments. And that's not that easy. However, it's quite interesting to do so because you have the possibility for a twofold optimization. Of course, first, by splitting up these compartments into many compartments, you have many different reaction conditions or reaction environments, and just by choosing these reaction environments, you can perform optimization. But then, if you assume that the exchange of matter only of molecules, by the way, only happens between adjacent compartments, you can influence the course of your reaction just by the proper arrangement, by the proper physical arrangement of your reaction compartments. And the idea is to find, arrangements which are particularly, or which yield particularly efficient reaction schemes. This is now done in a large European project of which we are part of. It's called ACDC, and it brings together theory and experiment. Of course, at the end, if you do chemistry, you're interested in real world experiments, but also modeling and artificial chemistry plays here an important role because, well, you see here you see what can be done and what is done, and here you can inspire the what can be done by ideas, by models that show what could be done if certain conditions were given. And so we want to combine this, well, moonshine land of artificial chemistry and modeling with the real sunny land of experimentation, just by digging a tunnel through these obstacles that separate these two countries. And we want to do that by attacking the problem from two sides, as it's always done if you dig tunnels. I already told you this project is called ACDC. It's basically about constructing a chemical compiler. That means, given a set of reactions, how have we to organize them in a spatial manner such that they are performed according to some, or optimized according to some criterion of optimality. This is, of course, not an entirely new idea. Here, for example, you see one cellular compartment, the so-called Golgi apparatus, and among other things, the Golgi apparatus is very important for the production of oligosaccharides. Oligosaccharides are basically branched oligomers, and it is, again, some sort of spatial organizations, of compartmentalization that supports this process. We came to this, we got interested in that field because we wanted to study how the synthesis of branched oligomers, here these are completely virtual structures, branched oligomers can be controlled. You may be aware of the fact that synthesizing a linear molecule, that's quite an easy thing because you have just to add one part after the other. But a branched oligomer is difficult, especially if you have linkers that are versatile in the sense that they can link together various different molecules. And if you just put them together, and if this assembly just happens in a random way, you get a lot of unwanted side reactions. But the question is now, how can you orchestrate that in a manner that you have at least a maximal yield of the structure you actually want to have? Well, there are various ways to do that. One is the so-called matched automaton that was also investigated in a EU project. It's basically an idea by Doran Lance, Stine Rasmussen, John McCaskill, Matthias Weiland, and I played also a little part in it. And there are also systems such as this. This is also an in silico study, a self-assembling microreactors, which by virtue of patterning yield different types of oligomers. And depending on the patterning, the yield of specific oligomers is optimized. Now, you could ask, well, why are you interested in small structures? Just use big test tubes. That's much easier. Well, it's not that simple, you know. If you work with a catalyst, catalysts are very important in chemistry. And if you work with a catalyst, you have to be aware of the fact that the catalyst basically has to fulfill two requirements. First, the catalyst has to be effective, otherwise it's not a catalyst. Second, it has to be stable. If it's not stable, it's of no worth. If you have a molecule which is a very effective catalyst but stable for only 30 seconds, then it's of no worth in a technical system. Because the transport, if you produce it until you have transported it to the site where it should be active, it's already decayed. Well, that's not really the case if you're on the microscopic scale, because on the microscopic scale, you have to transport molecules, even by diffusion, only over very short passes. And of course, you can support diffusion by some flows, stuff like this. To cut the long story short, a minute may be quite a long time on the microscopic scale. And that means if you work on the microscopic scale, the range of potential catalysts is much enlarged because the catalysts need only to be effective stability is, of course, still interesting, but not anymore that of a criterion. And in this project ACDC, we try to go towards microscopic reaction environments. Here you see vesicle assemblies. I call it the Trento foam, but that's not exactly as the people in Trento want it to be called. It's done by Silvia Holler, Federica Casiraghi, and Martin Hensig. And this Trento foam consists of reaction compartments which are linked together. And of course, this linkage should happen with certain preference so that you have a correlation structure in your, I still call it the foam. By the way, this foam is realized by a selective linker system that has been introduced by Peter Eggenberger and Mike Hadorn, and I'm very happy that Peter Eggenberger now again is working in my group. So, to summarize this, what we actually want to do when we have a chemical compiler is that given an artificial or real chemistry, we first have to formally describe it, and then we have to construct a network and to produce this network in a, for example, microfluidic structure, such that by using vesicles or droplets or something like that, small compartments in any case, whereby these small compartments should have a correlation structure, a neighborhood structure that supports the desired chemical reaction in an optimal or at least acceptable way. Okay, now let's go to something completely different, namely to the evolution of digital circuitry. Well, you could ask, is it difficult to evolve, for example, a scalable multiplier? And yes, it is. If you have, well, it's easy to have to evolve a 1-bit multiplier, more complex 2 bits, and 5 or 6 bits are almost impossible. The question is, why is that? Because if you learn how to multiply, my two boys are just learning how to multiply, you basically have to learn the basic multiplication tables, but then as soon as you can memorize them, you suddenly learn how to multiply by paper and pencil, which means that you can, okay, certain errors of course always happen, but you are basically unrestricted with respect to the size of the terms of the numbers you want to multiply. You became scalable. That's not what happens in this evolutionary process. And so how can we do that? How can we evolve scalable digital circuitry? And if you look at digital circuitry, you usually see that it's geometrically patterned, that this is a rationally designed multiplier. And then, of course, what you came up with is the idea that the geometry of the arrangement of the function generator somehow embeds a part of the logic of the problem to be solved. And this means that you should self-assemble your system. This is a completely virtual but self-assembling system. These are logical function generators, and here you have selective linkers, and then you can self-assemble patterns like this. And as it turns out, well, yes, self-assembly enables pattern scalable circuitry, and using an algorithm we developed, it's possible to evolve scalable multipliers, and not only multipliers, but a lot of other systems. And the interesting thing here is that to some extent, when this is really induction, because scalability means that you can multiply arbitrarily large numbers, but you can't do that by learning each and every instance. You actually have to learn how to multiply, how to perform a process. It's not possible to learn each and every instance of a multiplication table. So let's go to the social sciences. Patterning plays also a role in social sciences, at least we think so. We came up with a very, very simple and caricature-like model. We want to study the evolution of skills. Assume that we have two skill sets, A and B. Skill set A is easy to learn, but only yields small benefits. B is a little bit more difficult to learn, but gives higher benefits. And assume now that you have a network of dwellings, of small villages. And of course, there's always a little bit of migration, mobility in between these dwellings. So which skill set will prevail as a function of this mobility parameter? Well, we started to study this by assuming that these villages are really very simple. We assumed them to lie on an infinite dimensional simplex, which means that everything is connected with everything. And these are very small dwellings. They contain only 2 inhabitants. These inhabitants, they may be either masters of A and B or uneducated pupils. And of course, the masters and pupils die and they also reproduce and, well, the usual population dynamics stuff. The question is now, which of these, if the master can teach the pupil, which of these skills prevail? And if you have an infinite dimensional simplex, it's not only that you can use a fancy word, but you also can set up a mean field theory. That's the reason why you do it. That means you can work with probabilities, and what you're actually doing is you study the dynamics of occupation probabilities. You can formulate sort of a master equation. We don't go into the details here, but it's just a differential equation. For each and every state, you get a differential equation, and it's relatively easy to solve them numerically. And then you realize something quite interesting, as a function of this migration parameter, you realize that if the migration parameter is very low, the system dies out. If it becomes a little bit bigger, you have uneducated people, but no culture whatsoever. If it becomes even higher, then the skill A can be maintained. If you get up further, then then you have a region in which A and B can be maintained both. And then here you see the golden area of high culture. For a given range of the migration parameter, you have the complicated but highly beneficial skill is maintained and dominant. But then, interestingly enough, if you go even further up with the migration parameter, you again have a switch in which after this switch A is dominant. See, I don't know whether this is really interesting for the humanities. This really models some interesting process. But I think here this is one of the equations where modeling can help us to at least enter the discussion into the discussion with the humanities, which I think is an important and fruitful endeavor. So now, are we at the end of theory? Should I give up modeling? Well, there was this, of course, much more subtle than it is my most often quoted paper by C. Anderson, Christopher Anderson in Wired. Is it the case that data science makes modeling obsolete? Actually, I don't think so. You see, if you have mountains of data, a good model from time to time can help you to avoid disasters and to get through the mountain of data on the sunny side of science. I think this is quite important, and especially now in the pandemics, in the time of the corona pandemics, where, by the way, we are also heavily involved in modeling the situation in Switzerland. We have to make it clear to the experimentalists, but also to politics, that the models we are studying, the ideas about computing and whatever that we have a multifold purpose. Most people think that models are only important to predict the future, but as a matter of fact, models do much more. They help us to understand the past. They help us to optimize the present, because we can in silico study what happens. Sometimes we can predict the future. Most often we only can estimate it, and there's a fine line between prediction and estimation. Also important, models can help us to explain what we see. We can produce data and train modern controllers. We can study fluctuations, and of course we can identify weaknesses and strengths, and probably many more things. And this brings me to the end of my talk. I would like to thank many people. And again, I go to visit the ECLT in Venice and visit the School of Engineering in Zurich. If you're once there, you're cordially invited. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and thank Olaf and Christopher for inviting me.
Thank you, Rudi. Very nice and very efficient talk. So many things you touched on in just half an hour or under half an hour. Yeah, I'm sure people may have many questions. I posted as usual the link. I will post it again now in case anyone has questions they're excited to ask. But I'd like to start with the last topic you were talking about, which is modeling, and this is an exciting one because it looks like in a world governed by deep learning right now, and with a lot of data, maybe we don't need it. And what would be to you situations where we are nowhere close really to we'll always need a model, and which area perhaps we could give them up because we have enough data and that will work soon better. And is there, I guess there are different trade-offs, but first, are there like those clear examples at the end of the spectrum for you?
Well, let's start with areas in which we urgently need models. Let's start with COVID. I'm now involved in lots of COVID modeling in Switzerland. And yes, we have data, but as a matter of fact, it's not that of a lot of data. And first you have to see in quite many fields. I mean, if people speak of a deluge of data, well, it's a deluge of data, but sometimes it's surprisingly how few data you really have. And even if you have a deluge of data, this data may still be more or less worthless. And, of course, we have a lot of data, but as soon as it comes to data analysis also supported by deep learning, data nevertheless has to be quite good. Otherwise, it's of no worth. And it's not only that data can be noisy, data is quite often also quite lopsided. And I think that, for example, if you, let's speak about this corona stuff. If you want to, for example, study how if you want to study the processes that take place in the spread of the pandemics, of course, you can try to do data analysis, but it simply doesn't work. You don't have enough data. You have to bring in ideas, models, and it's also a matter of communication. I think this deep learning approach helps you, if at all, for the prediction of the future. It may be able to see relations which are otherwise not seeable, but it simply doesn't help you. And this is very important if you discuss with politicians or the government. It's absolutely not helpful if you want to understand what's going on. And for politics, it's quite often very important to understand what's going on. A model can help you to understand what's going on with simple data analysis. As powerful as it may be, this is much harder to achieve. So this is certainly one side. On the other side, I think that data analysis can help us to see structures which we are otherwise unable to see. So, for example, in the analysis in knowledge analysis, it can be very helpful because, so for example, in medicine, there were literally millions of papers and data sets and whatever. And as a human being, even if you are a very quick reader, you're not able to digest all these data. And I think there is really a lot of gold out there. But for example, to see the connection between nephrology and say whatever, some of the ophthalmology, nephrology and ophthalmology. I'm pretty sure that there is no expert in the world in both fields. And maybe there is a connection, you never know.
Right.
And here I think data analysis can help.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So to find connections that you didn't think of. So as a discovery mechanism, and analyzing many dimensions, perhaps also something that humans may not be very good at. We're good at maybe summarizing things because we have our own models and we have methods to do so. But perhaps, to analyze very vast spaces, maybe that's better done automatically. One question I had, and maybe that brings us back to morphological computing. is for problems like this, do you think where well, you don't have a direct embodiment in the sense of, well, physical 3D plus time embodiment, is there an application of morphological computation that is very strong in a more generalized context like this one, perhaps maybe even for COVID kind of research, or social dynamics, which you mentioned earlier? Would there be something that is, you know, not directly robotics or prosthetics or, you know, that kind of research, but taking that same idea of what is it, computing with your embodiment to and still be on the spectrum, programmable? I think you said more was it multi-purpose? Do you think there is something like that that is very strong?
I would allow me to make a wild claim. Architecture. What is a building? A building is a machine that modulates the frequency of encounters between individuals. And if the individuals are the knowledge carriers, by the way how you build a building, you can modulate how knowledge is passed from one person to the other, and how often they interact, how many time for let's say silent work they have, who will meet whom. And I once made an investigation about for a large Swiss bank about splitting up their real estate. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's a triviality, but if the buildings are more than 100 meters apart, then they could be in different cities. So that means you break up the communication between people. And I think, yes, well, in knowledge generation, okay, a building is probably not exactly a computer in that sense, but a building is an embodiment of the structure that modulates the frequencies of how often people meet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very interesting application, I guess, not only architecture, but also urban design, and how you manage different parts of policy making. I guess
absolutely
be part of that. I guess there is some effort these past few years in artificial life, the community in which we both belong to, I guess, yeah. In trying to work and help society. And it has been very important in this last year. That has been very special. Is there a way that your research has applications directly in society? I think you showed one strong one when you mentioned social systems. What would be your guess, not only in your research, but I guess more largely in the field, in a promising knob that it can be actionable on? Maybe a problem specifically that it could solve?
Sorry, I had a small technical problem here. I only got half of your question.
Oh,
could you repeat it? I apologize, but I had a disturbance in the connection.
No worries. It might be on my end something. Let me check. But yeah, I was asking if the research globally that you are presenting. So not only your research, but I guess your whole field has an actionable part for society. And I was mentioning that, well, our group, Artificial Life in Society and A Life for Good, we are organizing those series of workshops year after year recently, and we're trying to find where science can connect directly, more directly, to help problems. So would there be a problem that in your field you would feel is the most characteristically actionable for your kind of science?
That's a difficult one. It is a very broad question which can be answered in various ways. I think that studies in artificial, see, there are quite obvious studies in artificial life which can be of high value right at the present situation. Let's take simulations of pedestrians, which I would still think are sort of part of artificial life. I mean, it's now a field for its own, but I think it by the way, it really started in these A-life communities, or at least it was also done in these A-life communities. And that's now an important issue, because, for example, we have had quite recently quite a nice little problem in which we studied, well, is it actually a good idea to separate walking directions in stations, as in train stations? Does this have an influence on the spread of pandemics? And I was convinced that it hasn't. But as a matter of fact, in our model, it turned out, yes, it has. And I don't want to speak about the details of this, but artificial life and the research you are doing, and I'm volunteering it or learning to come into it, helps us to understand better our misconceptions. You know, there are a lot of misconceptions. Sometimes you think, for example, basically migration is good. High migration is very, I don't speak about people, but very fast migration. So I think it's very good to communicate every time and doing everything. Well, a model such as the one I presented you, it told us, yes, migration is really, really, really important, but you should have at least a little bit of time to focus on a specific area. Otherwise, you don't get sufficient time to develop the necessary skills. And I think because societies are highly nonlinear, and artificial life and such studies can model nonlinear processes, we may learn about the failures we are making, because human beings are not very good in estimating the consequences of nonlinear behavior. And I think, especially, for example, also in economics, you know, I'm not an economist, but some of these models are somewhat unsatisfactory in the sense that, they are very ideology driven, and I think models really can help us to discriminate between what we think that is true and what actually is true. And especially in the social context, you may learn quite a lot.
Right. Yeah. It's I guess it's a very large question that I asked. One thing we could do is quickly look at the questions we have on Slido. People are rather shy today. I guess it was a lot of topics presented in a very short
I apologize for that. But allow me one final remark to your big question. Your big question before. I think artificial life can help us more about presently, artificial life can help us to avoid mistakes. Maybe it doesn't give us solution, but maybe it helps us to avoid mistakes and misconceptions.
Right. Yeah. At least we can safeguard, and by making this kind of models we are used to in A life, at least you can eliminate obvious mistakes, perhaps.
Which are not obvious at the first glance, you know. And I made this mistake with this wrong estimate of consequences of pedestrian separation, stuff like this.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Let's see. There is a question here about you suggested that mechanical systems can be emulated by mass spring plus feed-forward neural net. And what about other systems of control, factory, or of perception, cats and dogs?
Of course, there are other possibilities. It's just that, you see, the mass spring system together with the feed-forward neural network was, so to speak, reachable with our mathematical tools. Of course, there may be other systems, and there's a huge literature in which I would also include stuff like reservoir computing and stuff like this. I just took this example because, I knew it, and I was to some extent part of it, and I studied mechanical systems. But of course, you can do it when the basic idea behind it is certainly translatable. Also, I do not know how to do it because I'm not an expert in these other systems.
Mm-hmm.
But it's certain. I mean, I bet it's possible, and this is certainly a very astute comment.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I guess.
If you're in.
Mm-hmm.
If you're interested in the field, I think the people knowing more about reservoir computing, they can tell you a lot about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we should mention reservoir computing is a huge field, and there is much left to do also. There's a lot in there. Very exciting. The other question was. I guess we talked also about the same morphological computation, talking about specific functions versus programmability, and I guess the question would be: is there a trade-off? Is there always a trade-off between them?
Well, I guess so, but I don't know, and I can't prove it. You know, there is, let's say, by an abstract model of computation, you go, so to speak, beyond physics, because you can emulate completely unphysical worlds. And this is a piece of cake to do that. Actually, let's say most physical systems emulated by beginners or also professionals in the field are at the end not physical ones, and so to speak, you can go beyond it, and that I think you necessarily have to pay a price for this. Of course, whatever you take out, you have to bring in back as soon as you want to apply it to a specific situation, and that's the way I really want to express it. And if you take out physics from your computational process, at least you have to bring. There's a logical necessity to bring it back in if you want to control the physical system. So therefore, there is certainly a sort of a balance in between. That, on the other hand, does not imply that specific functionality does not necessarily guarantee. A specific functionality is not necessarily good. You can have a screwdriver that doesn't match to your screw, and then the screwdriver is not a good tool. It has not a good functionality. So, or you have a nail, and then your screwdriver is more or less worthless. So therefore, specificality is not necessarily a good thing. However, if it matches, you don't have to care about the physics. It's already there.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I guess if you had laws of physics in any environment or dynamical system, maybe there is a way to predict some kind of generality in the sense that in our universe, it's probably useful to know math. Probably this and that theorem in mathematics are going to be useful at some point in technology, and that's something to say about the usefulness of useless knowledge. And some of it is predictably right. So some of it is going to be always. It's good to know. I don't know what I'm going to pick, but maybe I don't know, analysis, differentiation, whichever parts of math. This is going to come in handy at some point. So the question is. So is there such? Can you do such research and find whatever your sets of problems is? I guess there's always a bias. You can dig into that, but there's always going to be a. I guess in the other example, I don't know if it would I think maybe it was a slide of yours. Maybe it was Rolf's or someone else. Maybe George Whiteside's the sort of
soft robot. Yeah, that's George Whiteside.
Right? Yeah. And something like that is going to be helpful. So to grasp something like a cup, yeah, it seems like this arm can solve that task, but it can solve many other tasks. So are there subsets of embodiments that are somehow generally multi-purpose, and therefore, even without a clear bias in the sets of tasks you'll have to solve, you need that one. And it's again a very very high level, perhaps, or rather a dreamy question.
No, but it's a good one. It's really a good one. First, allow me to make a comment on your useless knowledge comment. Actually, if you look at applied mathematics, then, which by the way can be very abstract, then I think one lesson to learn is that it's only the ideas that first looked very abstract that are prevailing. Lots of, I don't know any piece of abstract mathematics that didn't, after some years of maturation, entered into the real world. I think there is really, I don't know all mathematics, of course. I just a very, very.
It's
very
true for the mathematics I know, because I don't know much.
Yeah, yeah. But see, algebraic geometry, which according to my boss, who works in algebraic geometry, is a very abstract field. Even that turns out to be very important. And most mathematicians now are number theorists working in cryptology, and number theory, at least when I studied, was deemed to be something for rich kids that have to spend their time with some sort of puzzles. Okay, but going back to your original question about, let's say, general functions that you need to perform that are of some general usage. Mm-hmm. I guess in robotics, it's to some extent, it's about moving objects. Robotics at the end is about moving objects, either yourself or something else. And the generality of objects you can move certainly gives you a hint of how specific or not, or how universal your function is. But in order to answer this question, we have to define the field in the sense that we say, well, okay, what is robotics? You can say, well, robotics is about moving objects and bringing objects together, stuff like this. I know that robots do other things, but that's probably that's quite a very general. I think it's quite a general definition of robots. So now you can start to specify larger and larger classes of objects that can be moved. Of course, there are certain limitations ranging from size to weight, whatever. A conventional robot certainly cannot move a single atom, and of course there are not every robot can move a ton or something like that. However, and these are trivial limitations, but there are other limitations, such as which are not yet understood, and as you put it so rightly, are not yet mathematically for quality. There are cases in which it's easy. So shape is comparably easy. I think weight is certainly very easy. Stuff like fragility is also very easy. It's sort of, but then there are things which are very difficult, such as how to quantify the different types of softness. And this is maybe also a problem of our language, because we say an object is soft. Well, there are many types of, maybe we are somehow misguided because there are many ways of being soft.
Right. Yeah, this is I realize this is a very large question again, but it's kind of fun to think about that. But I guess if we could solve that, this is addressing also, general questions of why. Well, why does intelligence tend towards more generality and I guess more. If you let a system evolve, would it naturally find more statistical functional complexity, and does the system solve more and more general problems or not? But this becomes very large. I see that we have a few questions now on from the stream. Let's maybe have a look. So we were addressing morphological computation. The next one is about, would a programmable quote-unquote shape be able to bring the trade-off out of the equation? So if you have a programmable shape, would you able to not have this trade-off between both? That's linked to the previous.
That's a very good question. Congratulations. I can now take I can evade this question easily by saying, well, it's not only shape, it's also mechanical properties such as elasticity, friction coefficients, stuff like this. You really have to, and I don't know the full extent of this list. So, but I think you somehow probably also consider this as being part of programmability. So at the end, this is sort of, let's say, a pendant to a completeness question. Is there for each and every mechanical problem, is there a mechanical solution? Or is there the mechanical analogon to, let's say, a halting problem or something like this? And of course, I don't know the answer. But the question is very good. I mean, are there problems which cannot, mechanical control problems which cannot be solved by mechanical means? I don't know. But that's a very deep question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes me think of, I remember attending a talk on category theory, and someone was showing some examples in which theorems could profit from being translated from one field to another and then back, and that would be much easier to prove them in the other field, and then translate them back than if you stayed in that first field to start with. So I guess that's maybe a way to look at how you can or not solve a problem mechanically, or you need to somehow use it as a substrate and implement a different method that will then solve the problem and then bring it back. I don't see. I guess it depends on the example of the problem, but even for I don't see what would be a problem that cannot be solved mechanically. Would it be something that requires context, or would it be something that needs some kind of mapping, perhaps?
Well, I don't know. Well, this is a absolutely non-trivial question.
Perhaps we can leave that also for the discussion part. And I see that we have one perhaps last question that someone posted, and it's about Corona. So in your personal opinion, if we had an AI and the CDC head and we all trusted it, will it do a better job? Would it do a better job than human politicians?
Yeah, well, see, the very easy answer is yes, but that's the too easy answer. I'll tell you why. I mean, first, one part of the problem politicians have to encounter is certainly that also in AI, independent of how big and how smart and whatever it is, has to deal with the fact that we have a very incomplete data situation. There are many things we still do not know. So, for example, we do not know the infectivity of the B117 mutation. Of course, we know certain ranges, but we don't know it in detail. And this evening, I have to present our calculations with respect to that to some officials of the Swiss Ministry of Health. And well, the only thing I can present you are bands, very large bands. And in these bands, well, you can't make a politics within a band. You have to choose one path in this band, and the AI or the modeler can only give you that band. That's the first aspect to be considered. And the second aspect is, well, we tend to think, as scientists, we tend to think only in, so to speak, rational questions or scientific questions, which can be answered in the sense of a yes or a no. Something is true or it isn't. However, there are also value questions in the sense we want to do something or we don't want to do something. Of course, it's very easy to control Corona. You just have to isolate everybody from everybody. And that would immediately stop the pandemics. But that's not what we can do and not what we want to do. And if we decide what we shall do, then we have the problem that we have to consider. We have to set up sort of a value function, and this value function. The problem with this value function is it's not known, and it's probably not universal. See, there are people. Let's make an example. Is it absolutely necessary, or is that the worth, the value of an individual life, is that infinite? Or is it the case that the individuals, at least the individuals, have the right to choose whether they grandparents who know that their lifespan is limited will have the chance to see their grandchildren, or have they to be isolated? Who decides that? Is it the government who decides that, or is that or are that the grandparents who decide that? These are very complicated questions, and I'm not so sure that an AI will help us to overcome these value questions. So to summarize, first, rational answers are difficult to give because we don't know the future. And from a political point of view, you always have the problem that data with large error bands or predictions with large error bands do not really help you, because then still you have to choose a specific path. And this with high probability, it will not be the optimal one. So it's quite questionable whether the AI will be much better than the politician. By the way, I want to make a small parenthesis here. I'm a member of a local parliament, and I have a little bit of experience, not expertise, experience with politics. I can tell you, do not underestimate the cleverness of I'm not speaking about me. I speak about these guys who are member of this parliament since 20 years. Do not underestimate their cleverness. They have quite a good gut feeling what will happen and what will happen politically. And it's hard to beat that, I can tell you. I can assure you. So I'm not so sure that an AI will be able to do that. And AI can be supportive, but you should... as soon as you have to take a specific decision, quite a lot of scientific information that is provided is of no worth anymore, because science only provides you bands. And that's the first issue. And the second issue is whether value questions can be reduced to scientific questions. So that means whether questions about good and bad can be reduced to questions about true and false is, to me, not yet clear.
Mm-hmm. Right. This is also a very very open question. I see that a link has been posted for the second part of this event. I want to check real quick if it's the correct link. Let me quickly ask. And in the meantime, I see that there is one follow-up question that we might discuss in the second part of this discussion. So please join the link that we will post. Let me check if it's the right one. And it's that, I guess it's addressing the previous question that we had. Is faster than light travel a mechanical problem that is impossible to solve? And I guess Martin here says, that it's related to, yeah, I see. No, someone says, yeah, it's, yeah, okay. So I guess we can get into that and other things in the second part of the discussion. Let me check the link. Okay, yeah, it seems to be right. So let's all go. If you want to continue our chat in private, we'll go offline in a moment, and you can join in the link that has been posted in the chat. And otherwise, I thank you very much for joining, all of you, today. Thank you, Rudi, for a very wonderful talk about so many topics. So it was really great to have you.
Thank you very much. It was really an honor.
And yeah, please visit him in Zurich or in Venice as soon as we can travel again. And yeah, thank you all. Talk to you very soon in the other room.
Very good. I haven't got